In a minute, I will talk a little bit about cyber warfare, but I wanted to say a few personal notes after some terrible events back home in Israel as both a father and two daughters and a man of the world. Yesterday, a guy that was influenced very much by social networks at the age of 17 got into a village where a young girl by the name of Aráel was sleeping. And she was sleeping so calmly, so beautifully, yet he took a knife and stabbed her many, many times and times again, until she died. And then in that occasion, it influenced many others on the social networks, and when his Facebook page was checked, you saw that a lot of what he did was influenced by other people that were training him on the network how to commit a murder. And the other terror attacks was done in the same way just a few hours later, where that act inspired many others to go and do the same. The very same people that liked that terror attack in Tel Aviv or in Israel are the same ones that did the like on the terror attacks in Paris and in Brussels and in London or in Orlando. And what I'm saying is that if we are to work together against terror, we need to work in full coordination, because when terrorist organizations or individuals are finding their way through technology, the horror can be large, sometimes very large, and I'm calling for international cooperation around cybersecurity, but also on the fight against terror. And so when we talk about cyber threats, I come from the business world. Many times we talk about companies, about banks, about certain civilian organizations that can be threatened, and we often see it as a business endeavor. One of my companies that I was involved with, CyberArk, was doing it primarily for the financial sector. But during the last few months and years, we're seeing that the cyber threat, if not careful, and if friendly democratic states are not cooperating, can become a cyber war, and I'm not exaggerating. The deadliest war in history it could be if we're not careful and if we're not doing what we need to be doing in order to protect ourselves against rogue states or terrorist organizations that are now using technology to attack countries and individuals. So you think of weapons as guns or tanks or airplanes, but the most deadliest weapon is this. This could be the deadliest weapons in the next generation of wars around the world if we're not careful and if friendly countries are not working with each other. And many people thought about one hacker, but you can think about a group of hackers. You can think about an army of hackers. You can think about countries that are using armies and armies of hackers, using billions of dollars in order to penetrate organizations, sometimes civilian organizations, not countries, but the civilian business organizations which are taken over and then used to attack the state. And so what is it that we can do about it, and how dangerous is it? Well, if you think about it, you talked about Brexit here in Europe. Well, I can tell you that you may have a Brexit on the economic side, but Europe and the UK cannot have a Brexit on the security side, because a security Brexit between Europe and Britain could lead to one of the bloodiest occurrences and wars in Europe on European soils. And together we stand as European countries and in friendly countries around the world, but divided we fall, because a lot of the terrorists are not attacking by borders. You all know about hijackers hijacking a plane and causing the September 11th occurrence. But let me tell you something that's much more worrying. If Europe and the UK don't work together, and a group of hackers will actually, and these are the plane movements, they can only penetrate Heathrow, which has 1,054 flights per day, and there's over 30,000 flights over Europe per day, and just not blow any plane up, just change the coordinates of the flights by a fraction, and what you will have is you will have over Europe a variety of planes instead of going by each other, hitting each other, and you can have the deadliest occurrence in the skies over Europe if the hackers are successful and if you're not careful. Just a few months ago in Germany, a group of hackers were able to penetrate the thermometer of a big furnace in a steel mill, not letting it cool and causing one of the biggest explosions after a meltdown occurred. The same thing can happen in nuclear civilian facilities over Europe. How many are there over Europe? Do you know the number? There's about 65. And among them, some of them are old, and their defense system is very problematic. And so all you need to do is be able to penetrate the temperature and cause a meltdown in 3 of them, and what you will have is major disaster over the soil of Europe. And some of it you can do through the UK or through elsewhere without needing to penetrate any new networks. Dragonfly was one of the deadliest attacks on pharmaceutical companies across Europe by a group of Russian hackers that all they wanted to do is steal the IP from a lot of these pharmaceutical companies. Well, what if they didn't just steal the IP, but change the chemical makeup of some of these drugs in a way that would be undetectable? What you can have is you can have the cyber plague over Europe if some of these drugs are manipulated in a way that is causing people to swallow poison instead of real drugs. And sandworm was an attack by the Russians on the Ukraine in the deadly winter where 255,000 homes did not have electricity, and so many people that were dependent on key elements and key issues died because they didn't have the electricity and the provided care. That can be done in a way that could be very harmful. So what am I saying? Both on terror and also on cyber terror, we need to act now. And by acting, I mean we need to take measures between different countries in order to create a public-private partnership with each of the country creating a CERT. A national CERT is a cyber war defender, where each of these CERTs will have in the civilian capacity things like banking and retail and utilities and infrastructure and automotive and airlines and a variety of verticals that need to work together among themselves and with governments. But more than that, if we're going to be able to protect ourselves, then what we need is, and that's what I'm calling for, is a combination of CERTs across Europe, across the United States, across Israel, maybe some other friendly countries that want to join the club of democracy and being able to defend and work together, because that hacker, which is penetrating one bank in the Netherlands, is using the same worm to penetrate the other bank in the other part in Paris or in Tel Aviv or in New York or in other places as well. So what I'm calling for is I'm calling to work together, country by country, business with governments, in order to protect the network and to keep it a safe place, because if we're not careful, the network leads to physical damage in a big way by those countries or those organizations that are using it in order to try and cause major havoc around the world, and we know that they're trying. Together we stand, divided we will fall, and that's the cause for working together between countries, between business and governments, and between the civilians and the civil liberties and the need for national and global security. Thank you.